Kiniksukuajaksi Stionico kinahkumi Taniku Stephen Davis. Nitsinsin in Amskan Nuputu Amska Pipikani Kowachasho Yate. Hello, my relatives. It's good to see you all this evening. My name is First Thunder. I'm from the Blackfeet people of the Amska Pipikani of northwestern Montana. I greeted you in the language of my grandmother's tongues. So instead of a land acknowledgement, I wanted to acknowledge with reverence and respect this higher education model that exists because of the sacrifices of those 7 generations prior to us. And we're honored here to speak to you all about a new recruitment retention initiative that has slowly become a student-led initiative that is creating new opportunities for students such as yourselves to do hands-on experiential learning outside the classroom, returning to what our people knew as our first teacher, right? Nature. Okay? We learned during this time of the exchange, the students are going to tell you a little bit more about the Honor Bound initiative, which is quickly becoming a program here at Montana State. And their experiences last year in establishing a new, or at least scouting to determine whether or not we could establish an annual exchange with other Indigenous people on the island of Kauai. And so Honor Bound, I'll let the students tell you more about it, but in short, it's a recruitment retention initiative in the Honors College. It started over a year ago. As a member of the External Advisory Council, I now serve you all. Is anyone here not an honor student? So I am the new assistant dean of the Honors College. I've been in this capacity now since the start of classes. But prior to that, I served this university, my alma mater. I graduated with a chemical engineering degree in 2014. And during that time, I had an opportunity to work with the executive director of the nonprofit here. But during my time here as a student, I can recall maybe 1 or 2 other Indigenous students, American and Alaska Native, maybe across the entire Honors College. And when I sat down across from Dean Lee in her office 2 years ago during the pandemic, she was asking if I would serve on the Presidential Scholarship Committee. So I'm sure some of you may have been familiar with that application process. It might have been what punched your ticket to the Honors College. For me to learn that we had nearly a half a dozen students applying to the Honors College through the Presidential Scholarship, I politely declined to serve on the Scholarship Committee, which now I'm stuck with as a function of this position as the Assistant Dean. But at the time, I at least had the ability to tell her, no, thank you, I don't want to serve on that, but I would like to reach out to the prospective students and just be a resource as an alumni. Offer them some coaching, direction, mentorship as they navigate their college decision. Well, as is the nature with most things in Indigenous countries, once you build a relationship, with that comes relationship. Okay, so once you build that relationship comes responsibility and an act of reciprocity. And what I found is it very quickly built a relationship with the 4 young ladies prior to them coming here and then meeting Frances when she joined this cohort, is that it's what our Hawaiian relatives would describe as kuleana, inescapable obligation. It's kind of that responsibility, that calling, something that speaks to you meaningfully that maybe you don't necessarily choose, right? And I think if we all take a chance to take a step back from who you are, where you are, and what you're doing right now in this moment, you could probably think about those times in your life where something meaningful occurred, right? Something that manifests itself to you. It's not something that you necessarily can force. As much as I'm sure you are all very studious as honor students, there are some things you really have to force yourself to do, and there are some things that just kind of speak to you and call to you. Those moments of timelessness, that presence, right? When you're doing something truly meaningful. This exchange is quickly shaping up to be one of those experiences, life-changing, transformative, in these students' own words, and they're going to tell you a little bit more about that. But it started, as most good ideas do, just in conversation. I was telling them about a colleague of mine, my first job here as a student. I was looking for something very tactical, something very, very utilitarian, something very basic that I needed, which was summer housing and needed summer income. As a student athlete studying engineering, I knew I had to lighten my course load by taking some summer classes. So I applied for a job through what was the American Indian Research Opportunity. Ended up working for this Native Hawaiian named Josh IWIKUA Mori, who actually ended up being our host here. He's an adjunct faculty with the Department of American Studies, and he's the executive director and founder of IWIKUA, which is a nonprofit located on the west side of Kauai. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with island chains, as I wasn't before visiting, Kauai is the furthest, northernmost island, in the furthest west. So he lives on the west side of that island, which is in a lot of ways very similar to Montana in the sense that it's very rural. And it has a very high percentage population of Native Hawaiians. And so I saw it through my own experience in my first visit there, a lot of similarities to what I knew growing up culturally Blackfeet, right, in those rural tribal communities. And having worked with him for several summers on a Montana apprenticeship program here at the university, we used to put on these high school programs where these high school students from the reservations had a chance to come to Montana State and work alongside faculty and do hands-on learning experiences where we were responsible for after hours and on weekend programming. So when they were done with their classwork, when they were done with the research, Josh and I got to spend time and kind of build a program around them. And then he went and formed this nonprofit, and he returned home where he felt his kuleana, his calling, back in Kauai. Even though he was raised on the island of Molokai, he recognized there was a need on the west side of Kauai. Right now, his mission is to empower those next generations. And him and I share that mission in that sense, and so we've been very close friends. I was telling these students about my dear friend Josh and the work that he's doing, because he graduated here with a master's in Native American Studies. But he's a farmer, and he runs a gym, and he runs a store. He does whatever the community needs. And I held it up as an example of, here is one example of sovereignty and sustainability from an indigenous perspective, where there might not be a major, right? There's not one degree you can take towards that. And so our first cohort of students, they'll introduce themselves and tell you their hometown, their tribal affiliation, and their major. And you'll see that these problems that exist, these grand challenges of the 21st century, especially those ones that are most keenly felt by those on the margins, like our rural and tribal communities, they require a different perspective and different experiences, and they require an interdisciplinary approach to solve those problems. And so what we're hoping to do is in welcoming our second cohort of honor-bound students and our second generation, or our second cohort of 7th generation presidential scholars, is that we really hope to transform rural and tribal communities by offering these novel experiential learning activities. So taking you outside of this classroom to what our ancestors knew as our first classroom. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and let the students introduce themselves. Again, your name, major, hometown, and your tribal affiliation.
Hi, I'm London for Thunder Hutcherson. I am a Lower Lakota from Pine Ridge, South Dakota, and I'm studying political science.
My name is Brooke Sangre. I'm studying architecture, and I'm from Helena, and I'm Little Shell Chippewa Cree.
Hi, my name is Dorian Kaiser. I'm from Wolf Point, Montana. I am Fort Peck, Sioux, and Assiniboine. And then my major is psychology and community health with a minor in sociology.
I'm Frances Olaf. I'm from Command Island, Washington. I'm studying environmental science, land rehabilitation, and I'm Alaska Native Haida.
I'm Andrea Storr. My major is cell biology and neuroscience, and I'm from Anchorage, Alaska, and I'm an Inupiat.
So when we sat down, it's probably about this time last year, we kind of met together monthly, and this was before I worked for the university, and I checked in with the students. And I was explaining to them what we were doing here, and as one of you, and I don't remember which, but I think you all jumped on this idea of, okay, so when can we talk about going to Kauai? So I've had the honor and privilege of serving on this board as an advisory member and watched it transform from a very basic idea to now a nonprofit that's building a lot of momentum and is changing West Side Kauai for generations. And so I think without further ado, I'll let you all get situated for your presentation. I'll ask that you all hold your questions until the end. We'll hold a question and answer. But really what this is an opportunity and an invitation to you all. If you're interested, if this speaks to you, this moves you, if this is something where you feel like your gifts and talents, this is something that you would like to apply yourself towards, please stay after and talk to me, and we can talk about what that might look like, right? Because what we're aiming at is another return trip this year. We're bringing more people who are willing to put in the work to really kind of help advance their mission and their support. Again, advancing that indigenous perspective of respect and reciprocity.
So, honor bounds. Stephen kind of gave a little introduction to how we began. But Honor Bound is a group. We're the first cohort of Native American students in the Honors College. And we really just wanted to form this community to create an outreach program for Native students. And really have an opportunity to connect back to cultural roots. That's kind of one of the objectives that we had. So this is the first, this will be our second year that we've had the Honor Bound cohort. And we just added a couple new students to our group. And that's kind of, I guess Stephen gave enough introduction as to how we started. But yeah, that's where we're headed so far. So.
As Stephen has already iterated, IWIKUA is a 501c nonprofit that promotes empowerment of young Indigenous people for tribal sovereignty, food sovereignty, and sustainability and wellness.
So to fund this trip, we came together and put together a grant proposal. And this is, I think this is a clip from what we sent in about what our program was and why we needed funding and why this was important to not only us, but the school and the program that we were helping, IWIKUA, and how continuing this with future funding and trips to Kauai would benefit not only us, but generations to come.
And then the program overview that we would have, that we had and are going to continue having going to Hawaii are all of these values, such as living a balanced life and understanding native plants and their uses, which I personally learned a lot about. A little story. I am very prone to getting bug bites, and Josh gave me many different plants to help get rid of them, and they worked. So like just learning traditional ways of healing is one of the big ones for me. But these are a lot of the different things that are a part of this program.
So this is the farm. We were harvesting lettuce. These are aquaponics, and so it's a full cycle of a closed system. So there was fish ponds, which are not pictured, and the water and nutrients from the fish debris is what was able to give the plants nutrients and grow the lettuce. That was then harvested, and the roots were recycled to continue the growing process. And we were able to learn how to harvest and replant and clean and distribute the lettuce to the community.
So this was one of Francis and I's main jobs on the farm, is to clean the styrofoam boards.
Yeah.
And these are what the little cups for where the lettuce grows. That's where it's what holds them in the water, and they have to be cleaned every time we harvest. And so this is one of our daily chores or kuleana on the farm.
So these are pictures of a harvest. On the left side, we have our wash basin. So after we harvest the lettuce and pick off all the old dirty lettuce on the bottom, we then put it in the wash basin, where it is then dried and bagged to be given out to the community. So this process is very tedious, but it's very rewarding because you get to you have something after a long, hard day of work, and you get to eat the lettuce afterwards.
This is one of the new projects that we had while we were working at IWIKUA. We built a new harvesting section for the farm, so they were able to double their production efforts at the farm. Also, we don't have pictures of this, but there's also a new farm that's happening across the street from here, actually a couple miles away. So now there will be 2 farms at IWIKUA, which is pretty cool. Yeah, next slide. So the lettuce that is produced at the farm goes out into the community, like London said. And the reason why Josh began this journey at IWIKUA, producing lettuce, is to feed the community, is the main goal. Hawaii used to be one of the #1 agriculture producing places in the world, but because of immigration to that place, it completely changed the way that Hawaii is able to feed its people. And so all of the produce is coming in on cargo ships, which really makes it expensive for local people to supply their businesses and their families. And so that's kind of the mission behind IWIKUA, and why they are feeding their community.
So, this is photos of the fish pond that we were luckily able to help out and volunteer on a Saturday. So this area is, we were building a wall that is going to help make the fish pond better, where it can start supporting the locals. Because before, there's mangrove, was it, that grew over and took over. So they lost a lot of the production they could have at the fish pond. Because before that, they were able to feed pretty much their whole community with that, but they lost the ability to do that with the mangrove and just colonization. but what we were doing here is building a wall, and if you notice we have buckets, that is us moving mud to expand the pond and make it stronger so that they could actually support themselves again.
The fish pond supplied like farming and water as well as fishing to all the communities, and when the mangroves took over, it completely destroyed the area. And I believe it was like, how many acres did they clear? Wasn't it like double digits or something? Like 20 acres of mangroves. It took a couple years, and so they weren't able to do the process that we were doing until this summer because you weren't able to physically get to it. A mangrove, it was an invasive species. It's like a big rooted tree. You've probably seen them in like Florida.
Okay, and then we've all come back with reflections on this experience, and for me personally, I saw a lot of similarities between the values that my culture has reflected through other indigenous cultures, especially here in Hawaii. And since we were working on a farm and producing food and giving to the land, and the land was giving back to us, that was a big value that reflected with my culture. Having that connection between people and land. We also formed a lot of bonds through storytelling and laughter, which is another big value of my culture. Laughter is something that is very, it's like laughter is the best medicine kind of thing, and we laughed a lot. And with Kevin. Also, we were able to just respect the culture and the history of the land that we were on and learn from it. And so, in terms of my culture and the culture that I was able to be in, it was very reflective between the two. Also, this was a pilot program to see how we could continue helping this community through potential research. And for me, if I were to do research, I'm going to use the community-based participatory research method, which is it basically focuses on working with the community instead of working on them or around them or over them, which has been a history of research with Indigenous people in the past. And so I'm personally, one of my career goals is to be in the health field, perhaps in a doctor situation. And so just finding research that has to do with health is important to me. And so these were just some of the ideas that I've had. Maybe tracking the blood glucose levels with people who consume the farm's produce and people who don't. There's also a lot of personal gain in working on a farm, and I don't think that's not taught very much. And so surveying the health and wellness of people working on the farm, I think, would be an interesting thing to look into, as well as finding some way to track nutrients that are put into the aquaponics system and how that comes out through the lettuce and how that helps the health of people who eat the food from the farm.
Getting to go to Kauai and work on this farm and see what another culture's perspective on colonization was really eye-opening, and it's something that I couldn't have learned through a textbook or a screen. It was something that you needed to hear through the stories of the people around you who had experienced it or their families had, and getting back to our cultural roots of storytelling, connecting back to the earth and being able to hands-on give back to not only the community but also the planet around us was just very satisfying and inspiring in all aspects. Working together with these ladies was amazing. The things that we completed would not have been able to get done in the time that it took all of us together if we were alone. Being supportive of all the processes in school and having honor bound as well as working together on the farm made getting through the day a lot easier. Going to Kauai inspired me to want to continue research here and helping local communities as well as farming agriculture aspects. Being able to work alongside IWIKUA and coming in with an open mind and thinking what can I bring but also what can I learn while still respecting the land and the people who were here before us. The impact of our work was very valuable from day one. You don't really know what's going on. There can be problems that you might not have expected, and you have to come up with a solution on the spot. And being able to use critical thinking and problem-solving skills to keep the farm and fish alive was something that was coming in very handy, as well as the responsibility that we had of our actions and what it meant for us to be on this land and what it meant for us to potentially do research or bring people who are going to do research, and that they understand the importance of the culture and the history of what's happened to the people there.
So my time in Hawaii was very exciting. Being able to immerse into local Hawaiian culture and way of life was very eye-opening to me. As someone who is very connected to my own traditions of Ogawa Lakota, I saw a lot of similarities in their way of life and my own. What I really loved was being able to bring old traditions of traditional fishing practices, like the aquaponics farm, the fish pond farm, and how Josh was able to use that and how basically new traditions and basically bring old traditional practices and new traditional practice together. That was one way for me to understand Indigenous people's ability to be engineers and use our own cultural ways to promote our traditional ways of life. My personal learning objectives, for me, as I said before, allowed me to really understand and connect my cultural way of life with Native Hawaiian, as well as promoted my agency as an Indigenous person who is Ogawa Lakota to help my community in the way that Josh has done with IWIKUA. It also solidified my personal goals of achieving a law degree, which in my eyes is one way for Indigenous communities and people around the world to promote their way of life and to fight for things that have been taken from us. So that's one thing I got out of
For me, I grew up on a reservation, so going there and experiencing how Hawaiians interact with their land and how they tell their stories just really made me reflect on my own culture and just kind of want to learn more about my own culture more. And then I also, as I said, I grew up on a reservation. Going there, I saw so many similarities. Especially I saw effects of what colonization for both in the United States and then on Hawaii specifically has had on the people, and they are very similar. I will not say that they are the same because Native Hawaiians and Native Americans are completely different. Brooke will say this again later because the Native Hawaiians especially feel like they are different and we should not compare them and say they're the same. Another thing I learned was respect and reciprocity through research. One thing that, because of Stephen, I was actually able to read an article about it, and it kind of opened my eyes to how we should be treating every culture like this. Instead of just extracting information and then saying, oh well, you guys are on your own. Because that's how I've actually felt with back home when people come to do research and then just leave and never talk to us again. It definitely just shows. And then for personal growth, I knew tourism was bad for Native Hawaiians, but I didn't know until you don't know until you get there. You get to see how they're treated, how their culture is just being covered up or it's actually being destroyed, like some of their ancient burial grounds are actually being destroyed. It's just really in your face when you go to Hawaii and you meet local Hawaiians and you get to talk to them and see why they don't like the tourism business there.
Okay, so going to Hawaii, I was really excited to learn about the Native culture, and I thought, my biggest takeaway was going to be specifically about Native culture in Hawaii. But going there gave me a much broader perspective on Native culture in general. It makes you consider a lot of different things when you have that intimate of a experience with a Native culture. So there was a couple of things that I noticed that was a connection between Native culture in the United States and in Hawaii. And like Dorian said, the girls before me, Native Hawaiians and Native Americans are not the same, but there are shared experiences. So I wanted to talk a little bit about a couple of those. The first is lack of respect for sacred symbols within Native culture. And the most egregious one that we learned about while we were in Hawaii was about the child islands of Hawaii, and that is Ko'a'alawe. Sweet. And so in the 1940s, the United States declared martial law and began using this island as target practice for the military. And they bombed it so much that it became the most targeted island in the world. And because of all of the disruption on the surface, it broke the water table, and so it completely killed off the island. And the reason why this is such a problem is because this island is the child island in the creation story of Hawaii, so it is a very sacred place, and there's complete disregard for that. And so as I was thinking about this in Hawaii, one of the things that I kind of found a connection between was the bison in the United States. That is a very sacred symbol to Native Americans, and that is something that was taken away from us. And so between 1800 and 1900, the bison population had a significant decrease, dropping from somewhere between 30 to 60 million to approximately 325 bison. So a picture on the right shows the effects of that. Those are all bison skulls. And then on the left is that island that gets bombed. Another point that I found that was pretty similar is unlawful acquisition of lands by the United States. The common tale of Native Americans in the United States is that they were forced off of their lands. And the same is true in Hawaii. When the United States military invaded Hawaii, they gave the Queen of Hawaii a choice, and she yielded to their authority in order to save her people. This is something that I had no idea. I did not know how Hawaii became a state, to be honest. I accept my ignorance. But Hawaii, prior to becoming a state, was a kingdom. They had a government, and they had kings and queens. And that is something that the United States totally disregarded when they took over. And then also in the United States, we also had sovereign nations of Native Americans, and they were forced off of their lands by the U.S. military. So those are some similarities. And the final one I wanted to talk about was just disregarding Native history in general and Native ties to the land. One of the things growing up in the United States and in Montana specifically with a couple great national parks in our state is that there tends to be a lack of representation of Native stories at national parks. In Yellowstone, there's very limited signs that talk about what truly happened as people were pushed off of the land. And the same is true in Hawaii. We went to this cave by Poipu Beach. Poipu Beach is one of the most iconic tourist areas in Hawaii. I think my parents went there on their honeymoon, so it's a very popular destination. And right next door, there's this cave. It's an ancestral burial grounds. And as we were walking through there, there was no reference to what that place was used for. It was used to house the bodies of Hawaiian royalty. And you used to have to go through ceremonies to be able to get entrance into that. And now it is a place that is just overrun with tourists that have no idea the place that they're stepping on. And as we began to do some research, getting home from Hawaii, that's something that's a very common theme in Hawaii, is disregarding Native history. And this is something that is not similar to the United States. I think in the United States there's so much land that it's easier to ignore Native history, but in Hawaii it's a lot more in your face because it is a much more concentrated area. One of the things that Josh told us about was there's a huge shopping mall in Poipu Beach, and this was built directly on top of ancestral burial grounds. So in the process of building Lululemon and all these diners, they had to build on top of a burial grounds, and they knew that. And that's a common theme. There's Walmarts, Targets, everything you can imagine that are built on top of those places. So yeah, that's some of the history that I found that was very similar to the United States. Yeah, so this exchange really just helped us open our eyes to Native culture in general. It makes you think a lot harder about the places that you're at and the people that came before you.
You would all please join me in thanking our speakers.